Welcome to Session 4 of the Sheltered Instruction Training. In Session 4, we're going to continue to learn about and discuss the first component of SIOP, which is lesson preparation. We're going to view two videos, one on lesson preparation and the other one on building background. We're going to discuss strategies for building background and discuss why it's important.
Today's session, we will discuss the component lesson preparation in the SIOP model. This is part 2 of 2. The topics are appropriate content, supplementary materials, adaptation of content, and meaningful activities. Let's take a look at the 8 SIOP components. They are lesson preparation, building background, comprehensible input, strategies, interaction, practice and application, lesson delivery, review and assessment. There are 6 features in the lesson preparation component. We have already discussed the first 2. Content and language objectives are clearly defined, displayed, and reviewed with the students. Let's talk about the other 4 features of lesson preparation. They are choose content concepts for age appropriateness and fit with the educational background of students. Use supplementary materials to make lessons clear and meaningful. Adapt content to all levels of student proficiency. And provide meaningful and authentic activities that integrate lesson concepts with language practice opportunities. Our content objectives for this session, or what we will learn, identify the last 4 features in the lesson preparation component, and incorporate suitable ways to adapt and supplement content. Our language objectives for this session, how we will learn, is discuss considerations for suitable content, list examples of supplementary materials and ways to adapt that content, and describe what makes an activity meaningful. So let's begin with feature 3, choosing content concepts that are age appropriate and fit within the educational background of students. SIOP classrooms ensure that even when lesson materials may need to be adapted to meet the needs of English learners, the content is never diminished. While looking at your grade level standards, you should also be thinking about your students and their educational background and what gaps they may have in their knowledge. When planning lessons, it is important to take into consideration the amount of required knowledge that a student must possess in order to understand what is going to be taught. If students are lacking background knowledge in a certain area, taking time to do a mini lesson on key background concepts or pre-teaching key vocabulary is especially helpful to fill in those gaps. Some considerations for making sure content concepts are appropriate are understanding the student's first language proficiency, their L1. Identify the proficiency level in their home language, whether it's through interviewing the student or the parents or going to the EL teacher. Do they read fluently and use learning strategies? Have you observed these skills? Or do they need to be taught cognitive strategies? You should also take into consideration their second language proficiency, or their L2. Identify their L2 proficiency in each domain: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And use that information can be found on the ILP or through the EL teacher. And use that information connected with the WIDA standards to find out what that student at that level can do. What you see here is a can-do descriptor for grade level cluster 3 through 5. If I was a 3rd grade teacher and had a level 1 and I wanted to do a reading activity with them, I would look at the reading domain. I would then look at their level 1. And these are examples of things they can do at that level in reading. Match icons or diagrams with words and concepts. Identify cognates from their first language. Make sound symbol word relations, or match illustrated words or phrases in differing contexts on the board or in a book. You should also take into consideration their reading ability. Are they fluent in their L1 and understand how text works? What their reading level is in L2? You should also understand the cultural and age appropriateness of the L2 materials. Are there cultural biases in the text that may create barriers? If so, you need to provide experiences that will help them to make those connections. You should also think about the difficulty level of the material to be read. Look for syntax or sentence fluency that may not be familiar to them, multiple meaning words that may confuse the content. Feature 4 discusses using supplementary materials to make the lessons clear and meaningful. SIOP classrooms engage students by contextualizing their learning with the use of supplementary materials that support the curriculum. The use of planned supplementary materials enhances meaning, clarifies confusing concepts, and makes lessons more relevant to the students' lives. Here are some examples of supplementary materials that help to clear up the lesson. Hands-on manipulatives such as cubes or counterchips. Realia, any real-life objects that pertain to the lesson. If you're teaching about watermelon, bring in watermelon. If you're teaching about baseball, bring in a bat and a ball. Pictures. Google Image is a great resource for this. Visuals such as graphs, charts, timelines, props. Multimedia such as DVDs or Learn 360 video clips or BrainPop, tape recordings. Demonstrations, modeling how to use the materials. Related literature, such as fiction and nonfiction picture books to supplement the content. High-low readers to supplement the content, books that are high interest but lower readability levels. And finally, adapted text, rewriting text so that it is at a lower readability level. So how do we adapt content to all levels of student proficiency? Often teachers are required to teach from a textbook that is way too difficult for English learners. We also know that ELs cannot be expected to learn all content information by listening to lectures. Therefore, we must find ways to make the text and other resource materials accessible for all students, adapting them so that the content concepts are left intact. The can-do descriptors, let's take a look at those again from the WIDA website, can help you to better understand what your students are able to do and what activities would be too difficult for them with their current language proficiency. If they're currently a level 1 in their reading strand or reading language domain, you wouldn't want to pick activities from level 3, 4, or 5. If they're a level 1 approaching a level 2, you may want to bump them up and use some of the activities from level 2. So adaptation can be used throughout the lesson. We can adapt text as a pre-reading instructional strategy, as an aid during reading, and a post-reading method for organizing newly learned information. So here are some examples of adaptations. Graphic organizers. They provide students with conceptual clarity when information is too difficult to grasp. They make it easier for students to identify key concepts and make relationships among those concepts. These can be used before, during, or after instruction. Prior to reading, they help build students' background for difficult texts. You can use them during a reading, which focuses students' attention and helps them make connections between concepts. Or you can use them after a reading. It is a place where they can record their understandings and write responses. Outlines can give students a form for note-taking while reading difficult texts. The teacher can determine the amount of information that is filled in on the outline according to the student's needs. And then it can provide all students with the scaffold support they need. Leveled study guides are written differently according to the student's needs. For some students who can easily read the text, the study guide extends and enriches the subject material, and they include challenging questions or tasks. For other students, leveled study guides lead them through the material with definitions and hints for unlocking the meaning. and they include fewer challenging questions and tasks. Highlighted text, when you can take a few textbooks aside or novels and reserve them for highlighting for ELs or for those with delayed literacy skills, can be particularly helpful. Highlighting overriding ideas, key concepts, topic sentences, important vocabulary, and summary statements reduce the reading demands for the student while still focusing on the key concepts and the information. Tape text. You could do key portions such as the highlighted text, or the entire text can be recorded for students to listen to and follow along within the book. Adapted text. This is the rewriting a text so that it just contains key concepts and provide definitions for terms within the text can be an effective type of modification for ELs. Jigsaw text reading works well for ELs because they are working with others to understand the text. Some classmates may have more background information on the topic and can act as the teacher for those students. The text can be read with other students and therefore it reduces the demands of reading alone. Marginal notes. Similar to highlighted text, you may want to reserve a few copies of a text for ELs and struggling readers. Print marginal notes directly in the margin of the textbook pages, or duplicate notes on a handout that students put alongside a page they are reading. The marginal notes should include hints for understanding the text, key concepts, and core key vocabulary definitions. And finally, native language text. If some students are literate in their native language or their L1, text written in that language can be used to supplement a textbook or clarify key concepts. And close reading is a strategy for taking a deeper look at a specific paragraph or part of a larger text. Moving on to feature 6, provide meaningful and authentic activities that integrate lesson concepts with language practice opportunities. Students need opportunities to practice their oral and written language skills in a context that is relevant to the lesson concepts. Providing ELs with authentic, meaningful experiences is especially important because it allows for their learning to become concrete instead of abstract. Activities should integrate lesson concepts such as interviews, letter writing, simulations, and models. They should provide opportunities to make connections to their own lives. And it allows learning to become concrete as they become attached to what they already know. Activities provide language practice with the new content in reading, writing, listening, and/or speaking. So today we identified the last 4 features in the lesson preparation component. We have also incorporated suitable ways to adapt and supplement content. We have discussed considerations for suitable content and listed examples of supplementary materials and ways to adapt content. And finally, we described what makes an activity meaningful. In this session, we will discuss the component building background of the SIOP model. Let's take a look at the 8 SIOP components. Today we'll focus on the 3 features found in building background. They are feature 7, concepts are explicitly linked to students' background experiences. Feature 8, links are explicitly made between past learning and new concepts. And feature 9, key vocabulary is emphasized. So what are our objectives for today? The content objectives, what we will learn, are to identify techniques for connecting students' personal experiences and past learning, and to define key elements of academic language. Our language objectives, or how we are going to learn today, discuss how to foster connections for students, and list types of vocabulary that needs to be emphasized. So let's take a look at feature 7. Concepts are explicitly linked to students' background experiences. All students have prior knowledge and experiences. I like to think of this as their backpack, what they're bringing into school, what do they already know. However, students may not have prior knowledge about a specific content area. That's where teachers need to build background using techniques that fill in the gaps and putting that new information into their backpacks that they can now bring back and forth to school. And using supplementary materials to help with these connections, such as photos, models, and illustrations. Building background is going to look different for each student since they come from varied amounts of prior knowledge. 3 interventions for students without background knowledge might include teaching vocabulary as a pre-reading step, or providing experiences, or introducing a conceptual framework. Explicitly teaching vocabulary prior to the lesson gives these students background knowledge for when they go into the text. Understanding that culture may not match what they're used to, so giving them some experiences through text or multimedia. You could also begin by reading a story, article, or play, or a picture book about the topic, or even show a video clip. You could duplicate a nonfiction article on a topic you are teaching. And in partners, students can read the article and code the passages with check marks for what they already know, question marks for what's confusing, exclamation points for what surprised them, or an addition sign for a new idea or concept. Finally, you can allow them to pre-test with a partner to test what they already know on the topic. Feature 8 is links are explicitly made between past learning and new concepts. In order for new learning to occur, new information must be integrated with what students have previously learned. This gives them something to connect it to make it stick. So how do we make those links between past learning and new concepts? This will look the same for each student in the class. Students often do not make connections on their own. We may have to provide those connections by asking questions like, who remembers what we talked about? Or, how does that relate to our objective? We may even have students pull out a graphic organizer or notes from the previous day's work to revise or add additional information, using charts, maps, and word banks that are visible in your room and referring to them often. Feature 9 discusses how key vocabulary is emphasized. We must be systematic and explicitly teach vocabulary, because content area text that students must read usually includes sophisticated vocabulary that's well above their level. Also, these are the words that might be found in reading performance tests. And an English learner's vocabulary instruction must be accelerated to close the gap with their native speaking peers. They've heard some of this vocabulary longer and repeatedly. And finally, just understanding that an English learner's acquisition of deep understanding of word meaning is very challenging. Marzano says that vocabulary instruction that targets academic terms can increase comprehension by 33%. So let's take a look at some of the types of vocabulary we should be addressing. When planning a lesson or pre-reading a text, you should pay close attention to the types of words that might confuse your learners. To be successful while learning content and language simultaneously, teachers must systematically teach different types of vocabulary seen in the text. So let's start with specialized content. If I'm having a science lesson on flowers, I might pull out specialized words or content words such as stamen and pistil and pre-teach or front-load that information prior to reading the text. We also need to pay attention to general academic words such as analyze and infer. These are words used across curriculum and also seen on standardized testing. Then we take a look at everyday vocabulary. These are multiple meaning words when they're taken out of context may confuse the student. If they're familiar with the word table as a place where they eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner, but when we're in math or science, table may take on a whole new meaning. And finally, we must pay attention to the language features and functions. Features of language might include rhetorical questions or nuances and voice in the writing of the author, sentence structure and grammatical features that are uncommon for that student must be taught ahead of time also. And then finally, looking at the language function or the cognitive function that will be used to comprehend the text and the words associated with that function, such as sequence has specific words to that function, such as first, second, next, last, finally. Compare and contrast has words that are specific to that cognitive function, such as both or same, different. So paying attention to those 4 types of vocabulary when we're planning a lesson are important to scaffold for our English learners. So how do we make it meaningful? We can use activities such as word quest, where students skim and scan. They look for an interesting word, write it on a word card, and with a group, they read the word using their technique cards. Using word walls in your room to display content and process words that they'll see on standardized testing, or even color coding, providing different colors for different parts of speech. Allowing students to keep a personal dictionary of the words they've learned. And finally, activities where they get to draw or illustrate, like 4 corners, where they write the word, draw a picture, use it in context, and provide a definition. Today, our content objectives were to identify techniques for connecting students' personal experiences and past learning, and to define key elements of academic language. Our language objectives were to discuss how to foster connections for these students and list types of vocabulary that need to be emphasized.
Whenever you're creating any kind of vocabulary reference material for the kids, it's always helpful to have a picture or an image to accompany the word. Something that can be helpful when teaching English language learners is using cognates to teach vocabulary. Cognates are a list of words related in meaning and form to a word in another language. Other activities can be used, such as pre-testing with a partner. This is when they review a unit test with a partner at the beginning of a lesson. Realia. These are real objects. They can include photos, illustrations, real items, hands-on, and 3-dimensional objects. Student journals can be used to reflect on previous lessons. They can be used during or after a lesson or unit. The surprise book. This is where you cover a book with butcher paper and you slowly tear the paper away, revealing the pictures while the student predicts topics and themes. This is the end of session 4 for teaching English language learners.